June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach. As American soldiers stormed the blood-soaked shores of Normandy under withering machine gun fire, they carried something in their packs that would prove almost as important as their rifles. A small, waxed cardboard box weighing just 2 pounds. Inside, the most scientifically engineered meal in human history. This wasn't just food, this was a weapon that had taken years of secret research, billions of dollars, and the collaboration of America's greatest minds in nutrition, chemistry, and industrial design. Today, we're going to tell the untold story of how the United States military fed victory, one ration at a time. This is the story of America's food war. To understand why World War II rations mattered so much, we need to go back to World War I, and the lessons learned there were written in blood and starvation. During the Great War, American soldiers faced a logistical nightmare. The food they were given was heavy, perishable, and utterly inadequate for the brutal conditions of trench warfare. Soldiers carried canned meat that weighed them down, hardtack biscuits that could break teeth, and bread that molded within days in the damp European climate. The result? Malnutrition became rampant. Soldiers lost weight at alarming rates. Energy levels plummeted, and morale, already devastated by the horror of industrialized warfare, sank even lower when men opened their mess kits to find food that was spoiled, inedible, or simply absent. By 1918, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps knew they had failed. Logistics officers estimated that up to 20% of combat ineffectiveness could be traced directly to inadequate nutrition. That's 1 in 5 soldiers too weak, too sick, or too demoralized to fight effectively, not because of enemy action, but because of what they were eating. When the armistice was signed in November 1918, military planners made a vow: never again. For the next 20 years, in the quiet halls of laboratories and military installations across America, a revolution was brewing. A revolution in nutritional science, in food preservation, in industrial manufacturing. Because the planners knew that another global conflict was imminent, and when it came, America would not be caught unprepared. In 1935, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Subsistence Research Laboratory in Chicago became ground zero for what would become one of the most ambitious food science projects in history. Their mission? Design a ration that could keep a soldier alive, energized, and combat-ready under the most extreme conditions imaginable. But this wasn't just stuffing calories into a box. The requirements were staggering. First, it had to be lightweight. Soldiers were already carrying rifles, ammunition, grenades, entrenching tools, and personal equipment. Every ounce mattered. Second, it had to be shelf-stable for months, even years without refrigeration. This food would be shipped across oceans, stored in tropical heat and Arctic cold, and still be edible when a soldier ripped it open in a foxhole. Third, it had to provide complete nutrition, not just calories, but proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals in scientifically precise ratios. Malnutrition was not an option. Fourth, it had to be palatable. Soldiers wouldn't eat food they found revolting, no matter how nutritious. Morale was a weapon, too.
And fifth, it had to be mass-producible. Millions of rations every single day. The team assembled for this challenge read like a who's who of American science. Nutritionists from universities, chemists from food processing companies, engineers from packaging firms, even psychologists who studied taste preferences and eating behaviors under stress. They called their first prototype the field ration, type C, the C-Ration. But designing it was only the beginning. Now they had to test it. In 1938, the first experimental rations were issued to soldiers at Fort Benning, Georgia. The tests were rigorous and sometimes brutal. Soldiers were sent on forced marches in sweltering heat, given only the prototype rations to sustain them. Researchers monitored their weight, energy levels, bowel movements, and psychological states. Every complaint was recorded, every suggestion noted. The early results were mixed. Soldiers complained about the monotony. The same meals, day after day, drove men to near rebellion. One infantryman famously wrote in a feedback form, "I'd rather eat my boots." The texture was wrong. The canned meat was too greasy. The crackers were too dry. The candy bars melted in the heat and froze solid in the cold. But the scientists persisted. They reformulated. They tested new preservation methods, vacuum sealing, wax coating, nitrogen flushing. They experimented with flavor combinations. They consulted with commercial food companies like Hershey's, Wrigley's, and Heinz. And slowly, methodically, they refined the formula. By 1941, just months before Pearl Harbor, the C-Ration was ready. 6 varieties of canned meat, beef stew, pork and beans, ham and lima beans, spaghetti with meat sauce, chicken and vegetables, and hamburger patties. Each can accompanied by crackers, candy, gum, cigarettes, matches, and toilet paper. It wasn't gourmet, but it worked. And then came December 7th, 1941, and suddenly America needed millions of these rations immediately. The scale of the challenge was almost incomprehensible. By 1943, the United States had over 12 million men and women in uniform, spread across every continent and ocean on Earth. Each one needed 3 meals a day. That's 36 million meals, every single day. The Quartermaster Corps transformed America's food industry into a war machine. Factories that once produced commercial canned goods were converted overnight to ration production. Hershey's chocolate plant in Pennsylvania began churning out the legendary Ration D chocolate bar, a 4-ounce bar designed to be heat-resistant, high in calories, and just barely palatable enough that soldiers wouldn't eat them all at once. Hershey's alone produced over 3 billion of these bars during the war. The Wrigley Company produced chewing gum by the ton, not just for flavor, but because military psychologists discovered that chewing helped relieve stress and improved focus during combat. Philip Morris and other tobacco companies supplied billions of cigarettes. Yes, we know now the health risks, but in the 1940s, tobacco was considered a morale booster and was included in nearly every ration. The packaging itself became an engineering marvel. Waxed cardboard boxes that could survive being dropped from aircraft, metal cans with pull-tab openers, a technology that didn't even exist in civilian life yet. Every component was designed for durability and ease of use under combat conditions. By 1944, American factories were producing over 500 million individual ration components every month. The logistics alone were staggering. Crates of rations shipped by rail to ports, loaded onto Liberty ships, transported across submarine-infested waters, and distributed to soldiers in jungles, deserts, and frozen tundras. With the C-Ration was just the beginning, because the military soon realized they needed more than one type of ration. They needed variety. They needed specialization. By mid-1942, the U.S. military had developed an entire family of combat rations, each designed for specific tactical situations. The K-Ration was the most famous. Developed by physiologist Ancel Keys, yes, the same Keys who would later become famous for the Mediterranean diet, the K-Ration was designed for paratroopers and mobile infantry units who needed lightweight, compact meals. Each K-Ration unit was smaller than a C-Ration, weighing just over a pound, and came in 3 variants: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Breakfast included canned veal, crackers, a fruit bar, instant coffee, and gum. Dinner featured cheese, crackers, a candy bar, and lemon powder for flavoring water. Supper contained canned meat, crackers, bouillon powder, and cigarettes. The K-Ration could fit in a cargo pocket. It could be eaten cold. It could sustain a soldier for days if necessary, but it was never meant to be eaten long-term. The caloric content was too low for extended use. Then there was the D-Ration, the emergency chocolate bar we mentioned earlier. This was survival food. 4 ounces, 600 calories, fortified with vitamins. Soldiers were instructed to eat it only when no other food was available. It was legendarily unappetizing, intentionally so to discourage soldiers from snacking on their emergency reserves. The 10-in-1 ration was designed for groups of 10 soldiers operating together. It came in a large crate and included enough food for 10 men for one day: canned meats, vegetables, bread, jam, coffee, sugar, and even condiments. This was essentially a portable mess hall, used by units that had time to prepare communal meals. And for air crews, the military developed specialized rations that could be eaten at high altitude, wouldn't cause digestive issues during flight, and fit into cramped cockpits. Each ration was a masterpiece of nutritional engineering, but their true test would come on the battlefields of Europe,
the Pacific, and North Africa. The official manuals said one thing. Combat reality was something else entirely. In the freezing forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers discovered that C-Ration cans froze solid. The contents had to be thawed over fires or tucked inside uniforms against body heat before they could be eaten. Some men learned to strap cans to vehicle engines to warm them while on the move. In the sweltering jungles of Guadalcanal in New Guinea, the opposite problem emerged. Metal cans became blistering hot under the tropical sun. Soldiers wrapped them in cloth or buried them in mud to cool them before opening. The cigarettes, intended as morale boosters, became a form of currency. Soldiers traded them with locals, used them to bribe guards, or swapped them with each other for preferred meal varieties. A can of ham and lima beans, universally despised and nicknamed Ham and Mothers, might be traded for 3 packs of cigarettes and a chocolate bar.
Soldiers became incredibly creative with their rations. They mixed components to create new meals. Crackers crushed into canned meat became a kind of hash. Coffee powder mixed with chocolate made an improvised mocha. Some units pooled their rations and cooked communal stews over campfires, adding whatever local ingredients they could scavenge. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of these rations was psychological. In the chaos and terror of combat, the ritual of opening a ration box provided a moment of normalcy. The familiar taste of Hershey's chocolate, the smell of instant coffee. These small comforts connected soldiers to home, to civilization, to the world they were fighting to preserve. Veterans would later recall specific meals eaten in specific places: a can of beef stew consumed in a shell crater in Normandy, a K-Ration breakfast eaten just before dawn on Iwo Jima. These memories became as vivid as the combat itself. How did America's rations compare to those of its enemies? The answer reveals much about the industrial and scientific capabilities of each nation. German soldiers received what was called the Eisernen Ration, the iron ration, an emergency supply that included preserved meat, hard bread, and ersatz coffee made from roasted grains. As the war progressed and Germany's resources dwindled, rations became increasingly inadequate. By 1944, German soldiers were often subsisting on black bread, thin soups, and whatever they could forage or steal. Malnutrition became widespread in Wehrmacht units, particularly on the Eastern Front. Japanese rations were even more austere. The typical Japanese soldier carried rice, dried fish, pickled vegetables, and miso paste. The Japanese military philosophy emphasized endurance and self-sacrifice, and this extended to nutrition. Portions were small by Western standards, and soldiers were expected to supplement their rations with local food sources. In many Pacific campaigns, this proved disastrous. Japanese soldiers on isolated islands literally starved to death when supply lines were cut. Italian rations included pasta, of course, along with canned meat, bread, and wine. They were generally adequate in quality, but suffered from the same logistical problems that plagued the Italian military overall: inconsistent supply chains, corruption, and poor distribution. By contrast, American rations represented an overwhelming material advantage. A well-fed American soldier was stronger, had more stamina, recovered faster from wounds and illness, and maintained better morale. This wasn't just about calories, it was about industrial capacity. America could afford to ship millions of tons of food across the world. America could afford to include cigarettes and candy for morale. America could afford to give every soldier toilet paper. These small details added up to a massive strategic advantage. But here's something remarkable. While American soldiers overseas were eating relatively well, American civilians at home were making sacrifices to ensure those rations could be produced. Beginning in 1942, the U.S. government implemented rationing programs for civilians. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter, cheese, and canned goods were all rationed using a coupon system. Families were limited in what they could purchase, even if they could afford more. Why? Because every pound of sugar that went into a Hershey's bar for a soldier was a pound that couldn't go into a cake at home. Every ounce of beef that went into C-Ration stew was an ounce that couldn't be sold at the local butcher shop.
The American people understood this. They accepted it. Posters proclaimed, "Food is a weapon. Don't waste it." Cookbooks taught housewives how to create nutritious meals with limited ingredients. Victory gardens sprang up in backyards and vacant lots, producing vegetables to supplement rationed groceries. This created a powerful emotional connection between the home front and the fighting front. When a mother opened her ration book and counted her sugar coupons, she thought of her son eating K-rations in a foxhole in France. When a child went without butter on their bread, they knew it was so their father could have food in the Pacific. The rations became symbols of shared sacrifice, of national unity, of a democracy mobilized for total war. And companies that produced ration components used this patriotic fervor in their advertising. Hershey's ran ads showing soldiers enjoying their chocolate bars under headlines like "A taste of home, wherever they serve." Wrigley's advertised, "Remember this wrapper, it's going overseas to our fighting men." The ration wasn't just military equipment, it was an emotional bond between a nation and its soldiers. As the war progressed, the military developed increasingly specialized rations for unique situations. From mountain troops fighting in the Italian Alps and the Himalayas, the Quartermaster Corps created high-calorie rations with extra fats and sugars to help soldiers maintain body heat in freezing conditions. For jungle warfare, they developed rations with enhanced salt content to replace electrolytes lost through constant sweating and tropical humidity. For pilots and air crews, they created compact, easy-to-eat rations that wouldn't cause air sickness or digestive issues during flight. These came in specially designed packages that could be opened with one hand, allowing pilots to eat while maintaining control of their aircraft. And then there were the clandestine rations, specialized packages for Office of Strategic Services operatives and resistance fighters behind enemy lines. These were designed to look like local civilian food products, with labels in German, Italian, or Japanese. An OSS agent parachuting into occupied France might carry rations disguised as French cheese, German sausages, or Italian pasta to avoid suspicion. Perhaps the most innovative were the escape rations, tiny, concentrated food packages hidden in the hollow heels of flight boots, inside buttons, or in other concealed locations. If a pilot was shot down behind enemy lines, these rations could keep them alive for days while evading capture. The military even developed rations for prisoners of war. The Red Cross parcel wasn't technically a military ration, but it was coordinated with the Quartermaster Corps. These packages, sent through neutral Switzerland, provided supplemental food to American POWs in German and Japanese camps. They contained canned meat, chocolate, cigarettes, coffee, and other items, often the difference between survival and starvation for men in brutal captivity. Each of these specialized rations required its own research, testing, and production infrastructure. It was an extraordinary logistical achievement. The Pacific Theater presented unique challenges for combat rations, challenges that pushed the limits of food science. The humidity was the first enemy. In jungles where it rained every afternoon and the air was perpetually saturated with moisture, traditional packaging failed. Cardboard turned to mush, wax coatings melted, paper labels peeled away. Engineers responded with innovations: rubberized coatings, aluminum foil liners, and heat-sealed plastic wrapping, technologies that were cutting edge for the era.
Then there was the heat. Temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Chocolate melted into liquid. Cheese separated into oil and solids. Meat developed strange textures. The solution? Reformulation. Hershey's developed a new chocolate formula that remained solid up to 120 degrees. Cheese was replaced with processed cheese products that could withstand temperature fluctuations. And then there were the insects. Ants invaded ration boxes. Weevils bored through packaging. Tropical beetles could chew through supposedly impenetrable metal cans. Soldiers in the Pacific developed elaborate techniques for protecting their rations, sealing boxes with tape, hanging them from ropes away from ant trails, even suspending them in trees. But perhaps the most significant Pacific challenge was cultural. American soldiers encountered local populations with entirely different food traditions. The rice-based diets of Asia were unfamiliar to most American troops, and local populations, often starving due to Japanese occupation, were desperate for food.
Rations became diplomatic tools. Commanders distributed excess rations to local civilians to build goodwill, gather intelligence, and recruit guides and scouts. In this way, the humble C-Ration became part of America's counterinsurgency strategy. And there was another effect: the introduction of American food culture to millions of Asians and Pacific Islanders who had never tasted chocolate, chewing gum, or canned meat. This cultural exchange would have lasting effects long after the war ended. In Europe, the challenges were different, but no less severe. The winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest in European history. During the Battle of the Bulge, temperatures plummeted to below zero. Soldiers discovered that metal ration cans became so cold that touching them with bare hands caused instant frostbite. The solution was improvisation. Soldiers learned to warm cans using sterno tablets, small fuel canisters included in some ration packages. They heated cans over small fires made from ammunition crate wood. Some even developed the dangerous habit of warming cans on the exhaust manifolds of tanks and trucks. Hot food became not just a comfort, but a medical necessity. Doctors observed that soldiers who ate hot meals maintained better core body temperature and suffered fewer cases of frostbite and hypothermia. The Quartermaster Corps responded by increasing distribution of sterno tablets and developing insulated ration carriers, though these arrived too late for most of the winter fighting. Europe also presented different cultural dynamics. In France, Belgium, and Italy, local populations were more familiar with American food culture than Asians had been. Soldiers could trade rations for fresh bread, wine, eggs, and other local foods. This created an underground economy. A carton of cigarettes could buy a week's lodging. A case of C-Rations could purchase information about German positions. Chocolate bars became courting gifts. Countless romances between American soldiers and European women began with the gift of a Hershey bar. And, after the liberation of concentration camps and prisoner of war facilities, American rations took on a humanitarian role. Starving survivors were given rations carefully. Too much rich food too quickly could kill someone who had been starved. Military doctors developed refeeding protocols, gradually increasing caloric intake to allow digestive systems to readjust. Photographs from 1945 show American soldiers distributing rations to skeletal camp survivors. Images that capture both the horror of the Holocaust and the basic human dignity of young American liberators sharing their food. But rations weren't just about feeding American soldiers. They became weapons of psychological warfare. Allied commanders authorized the deliberate distribution of American rations to enemy troops as a surrender incentive. Leaflets dropped over German positions showed photographs of abundant American food alongside messages. Well-fed American soldiers are enjoying these meals. You are starving. Surrender, and you too can eat like this. After major battles, advancing American forces would often leave caches of rations in areas where German stragglers were hiding. The hope was that hungry enemy soldiers, tasting American food for the first time, would realize the material superiority of the Allies and give up the fight. There are documented cases of this working. German prisoners of war frequently mentioned Allied food as evidence of America's industrial power. When interrogated, many expressed shock at the quality and quantity of American rations. One captured Wehrmacht officer reportedly said, "We knew we had lost when we saw what your ordinary soldiers eat every day." The contrast was stark. By late 1944, German soldiers were subsisting on thin soups, black bread, and whatever they could forage. American soldiers had beef stew, chocolate, and coffee. This wasn't just a nutritional advantage, it was a morale destroyer for the enemy. In the Pacific, the strategy was similar. Japanese soldiers on isolated islands, cut off from resupply and starving, would occasionally surrender after discovering stockpiles of American rations. The psychological impact of eating real food after months of near starvation could break the fierce resistance that characterized Japanese military culture. And, after the war ended, rations played a crucial role in occupation and reconstruction. In Germany and Japan, American military governments distributed surplus rations to prevent mass starvation and stabilize occupied territories. Children who received chocolate and chewing gum from American soldiers remembered those small kindnesses for the rest of their lives, shaping their perception of America for decades to come. Let's talk numbers, because the scale of the ration program was almost incomprehensible. By the end of World War II, the United States had produced over 3 billion C-Ration cans, more than 105 million K-Ration boxes, 3 billion Hershey D-Ration chocolate bars, billions of cigarettes, millions of pounds of instant coffee, and countless other components. The total cost? Over $12 billion in 1940s money, equivalent to roughly $200 billion today. The infrastructure required to produce this was staggering. The Quartermaster Corps operated or contracted with 312 canning facilities, 247 bakeries producing hardtack and crackers, 54 chocolate production plants, 39 coffee processing facilities, and hundreds of packaging and assembly plants. This industrial mobilization employed millions of workers, many of them women who took jobs in food production plants while men went off to fight. The logistics of distribution were equally mind-boggling. The Army Transportation Corps coordinated thousands of railroad cars carrying rations to ports, hundreds of cargo ships dedicated solely to food transport, tens of thousands of trucks distributing rations at the front lines, and even aircraft drops for isolated units. At the peak of the war in 1944, the United States was shipping more than 100,000 tons of combat rations overseas every month. That's the equivalent weight of more than 1,000 fully loaded Boeing 747s every single month. This wasn't just logistics. This was a miracle of industrial capitalism, organizational planning, and national will. But behind these massive numbers were individual human stories, moments that reveal what these rations meant to the men who carried them. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, who fought in some of the most brutal battles of the Pacific, Peleliu and Okinawa, later wrote in his memoir, With the Old Breed, about the comfort of a simple K-Ration meal eaten while sheltering from Japanese artillery. He described the taste of the cheese spread on crackers as better than any restaurant meal I'd ever had, not because it was objectively delicious, but because he was alive to eat it. Staff Sergeant Ralph Borelli of the 82nd Airborne wrote home to his family about receiving his first hot meal in weeks after the Battle of the Bulge, a heated C-Ration beef stew. He said it made him cry. Navy Corpsman John Bradley, one of the flag raisers on Iwo Jima, carried K-rations in his medical bag alongside bandages and morphine. He later recalled trading his rationed cigarettes to Marines in exchange for help carrying wounded men to aid stations. And there are darker stories too. Soldiers in desperate situations doing desperate things. Men who stole rations from dead comrades. Units that hoarded food while others starved. The brutal reality that even in a well-supplied army, distribution wasn't always equal. One particularly haunting account comes from the liberation of Dachau concentration camp. An American soldier described giving his chocolate bar to a teenage girl who weighed less than 70 pounds. She ate it slowly, savoring every bite, tears streaming down her face. The soldier wrote that he would never forget her eyes, or the crushing realization of what human beings were capable of doing to each other. These personal stories remind us that behind every statistic, every ration box, every meal eaten in combat, there was a human being experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion: fear, relief, camaraderie, grief, hope. The rations were never just food. They were connections to home, to life, to the possibility of survival. When the war ended in August 1945, the military had a new problem: millions of rations stockpiled around the world with no one left to eat them. The solution became the foundation of post-war humanitarian aid. Surplus rations were distributed through the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration to feed displaced persons, refugees, and starving populations across Europe and Asia. In the immediate aftermath of the war, these rations literally saved millions of lives. In occupied Germany, where food production had collapsed, American rations supplemented meager local supplies and prevented mass starvation. In Japan, similar programs helped stabilize the country during the difficult early years of occupation. But the legacy of military rations extended far beyond immediate post-war relief. The technologies developed for combat rations revolutionized the commercial food industry. Freeze-drying, vacuum sealing, and advanced preservation techniques pioneered by the Quartermaster Corps became standard in civilian food production. Instant coffee, developed specifically for combat rations, became a global commercial phenomenon after the war. Companies like Nescafé built empires on technology refined for combat use. Pre-cooked, shelf-stable meals, the foundation of the C-Ration, evolved into the entire modern convenience food industry. TV dinners, camping meals, emergency supplies, even modern MREs all descend directly from World War II research. And there was a cultural impact, too. An entire generation of American men had been introduced to convenience food during military service. When they returned home, they expected and demanded similar products for civilian life. This helped drive the post-war explosion of processed food, supermarkets, and fast food culture. The technologies that fed American victory became the technologies that fed American prosperity. The direct descendant of the World War II ration is the MRE, meal ready to eat, introduced by the U.S. military in 1981 and still in use today. But the evolution from C-Rations and K-Rations to MREs took decades and involved continued research into nutrition, preservation, and packaging. In the 1950s and 60s, the military experimented with freeze-dried foods, retort pouches, flexible metal and plastic containers that could be sterilized like cans but weighed less weight, and various other innovations. The modern MRE incorporates technologies that would have seemed like science fiction to World War II soldiers. Flameless ration heaters that use chemical reactions to warm food without fire, retort pouches that keep food shelf-stable for years without refrigeration, sophisticated flavor enhancement techniques that make field rations actually taste good, ergonomic packaging designed for ease of use in combat conditions. A modern MRE contains about 1,300 calories, enough for one main meal, and includes an entree, side dish, dessert, crackers or bread, spread, peanut butter, cheese, or jelly, beverage powder, utensils, and accessories like matches, gum, and seasonings. And yes, they still include toilet paper. But here's the remarkable thing. Despite all the technological advances, soldiers today still complain about the same things World War II soldiers complained about: the monotony, the texture, certain menu items that become universally despised. In the modern MRE lineup, vegetable omelet holds the same status as ham and lima beans did in 1944, universally reviled and avoided. Some things never change. Today, original World War II rations have become sought-after historical artifacts. Collectors around the world seek out unopened C-Ration cans, K-Ration boxes, and other components. Why? Because these objects represent tangible connections to history. To hold an 80-year-old K-Ration box is to hold something that might have been in the hands of a paratrooper dropping into Normandy, a Marine storming Iwo Jima, or a soldier liberating a concentration camp. The condition of surviving rations varies wildly. Many were opened and discarded. Others were kept as souvenirs by veterans. Some remained in military warehouses for decades before being discovered. There's even a subculture of people who eat vintage military rations on camera for YouTube videos, usually with mixed results. 80-year-old chocolate? Probably still edible. 80-year-old canned meat? Probably not advisable. But beyond the curiosity value, these artifacts serve an important educational purpose. Museums around the world display ration components to help tell the story of World War II logistics. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans has an entire exhibit dedicated to military food production. And companies like Hero Rations, who are now offering reproduction packaging for enthusiasts, reenactors, and educators, help keep this history alive. These reproductions allow people to experience what a K-Ration box looked like, felt like, how it opened, without destroying precious original artifacts. This preservation work ensures that future generations can understand not just the battles and strategies of World War II, but the daily lived experience of the soldiers who fought it. The lessons learned from World War II combat rations continue to have applications today, not just in military contexts, but in disaster relief, space exploration, and emergency preparedness. When Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, one of the first responses was the distribution of military MREs to displaced populations. The technology developed for combat feeding proved ideal for disaster scenarios where infrastructure had collapsed.
NASA's space food program draws directly from military ration research. The freeze-dried meals eaten by astronauts on the International Space Station are evolutionary descendants of K-Rations and C-Rations, compact, shelf-stable, nutritionally complete meals designed for extreme environments. Emergency preparedness experts recommend that every household maintain a supply of non-perishable food, essentially creating a civilian version of the military ration stockpile. The same preservation techniques, packaging methods, and nutritional principles apply. And in developing nations, organizations like the World Food Program use technologies pioneered by the Quartermaster Corps to create ready-to-use therapeutic foods, shelf-stable, nutritionally dense products that can treat severe malnutrition in children. The principles established in the 1940s, create food that is lightweight, shelf-stable, nutritionally complete, and mass-producible, remain relevant in virtually every context where feeding large numbers of people under difficult conditions is required. In this sense, the work done by those food scientists in Chicago in the 1930s and 40s continues to save lives and solve problems today, decades after the last shots of World War II were fired. Before we conclude, we need to recognize the hidden heroes of this story, the people whose names don't appear in history books, but whose work was absolutely essential to Allied victory. The food scientists at the Quartermaster Subsistence Research Laboratory, who spent years perfecting nutritional formulas and preservation techniques. The factory workers, predominantly women, who stood on assembly lines 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, producing millions of ration components. The agricultural workers who grew the wheat for crackers, raised the cattle for canned meat, and harvested the sugar for chocolate bars, all while facing labor shortages as men went off to war. The truck drivers who hauled rations from factories to railheads, the railroad workers who kept supply trains moving, the merchant mariners who risked U-boat attacks to transport rations across the Atlantic. The Quartermaster Corps soldiers who managed supply depots, inventoried stocks, and coordinated distribution, unglamorous work that nevertheless kept armies fed and functional. And the combat engineers who built roads and bridges that allowed supply trucks to reach frontline units, often under fire. None of these people would ever be celebrated as war heroes. They wouldn't receive medals for valor. Their names wouldn't appear in history books about great battles. But without them, those great battles couldn't have been won. The logistics officers, food scientists, factory workers, and supply personnel were as essential to victory as any infantry division or bomber squadron. Their contributions deserve to be remembered and honored.
Ultimately, the story of World War II combat rations is about more than food. It's about what happens when a democracy mobilizes its full industrial, scientific, and human resources toward a single purpose. It's about the relationship between the home front and the fighting front, civilian workers sacrificing so soldiers could eat, and soldiers fighting so civilians could remain free. It's about the small comforts that sustain human beings in extreme circumstances, a piece of chocolate in a foxhole, a stick of gum during a bomber mission, a cup of instant coffee before an attack. It's about American industrial capitalism at its most effective, taking the challenge of feeding millions of soldiers across the world and solving it through innovation, mass production, and logistical brilliance. And it's about the ways that warfare drives technological progress. The preservation techniques, packaging innovations, and nutritional science developed for military purposes became the foundation of post-war civilian food industry. But perhaps most importantly, it's a reminder that wars are not won only with weapons and tactics. They are won by logistics, by supply chains, by the unglamorous work of ensuring that soldiers have food, clothing, equipment, and ammunition when and where they need it. Napoleon supposedly said that an army marches on its stomach. He was right. The American military understood this lesson and built an entire industrial infrastructure to ensure that its armies were the best fed in history. And in doing so, they created one of the hidden weapons of World War II, the humble combat ration.
On September 2, 1945, when Japanese officials signed the surrender documents aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, they were signing the end of the most destructive conflict in human history. Over 70 million people had died. Entire cities had been destroyed. Nations had been devastated. But America had prevailed. And while historians would analyze grand strategy, brilliant commanders, and decisive battles, a small part of that victory came in waxed cardboard boxes and metal cans. The soldiers who ate K-Rations and C-Rations during the war came home and built modern America. They started families, built businesses, created the prosperous post-war world. Many kept mementos of their service, a faded photograph, a helmet, a medal, and sometimes, tucked away in an attic or basement, an unopened ration box, a small reminder of a time when they were young and the world hung in the balance. Today, when we see reproductions of
When collectors preserve these artifacts, when museums display them, we're not just looking at old packaging. We're looking at a connection to a generation that faced humanity's darkest hour and emerged victorious. We're looking at proof that the mundane and the heroic are sometimes one and the same. Because feeding an army of 12 million soldiers across the world, ensuring that each one had adequate nutrition to fight effectively, was both an extraordinary accomplishment and a routine logistical task. It was both a miracle of industrial coordination and a simple matter of providing meals. That's the paradox at the heart of this story. The combat ration was simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary, forgettable and unforgettable, just food and so much more than food. So the next time you open a granola bar or heat up instant coffee or unwrap a chocolate bar, remember that these conveniences are the descendants of a secret weapons program, a program designed not to kill enemies, but to keep soldiers alive and fighting. Remember the scientists who designed them, the workers who produced them, the soldiers who ate them, and the victory they helped achieve. Because this is the story of how America fed victory, one ration at a time.